I'm Amy Torres, here with Bill Free and our new friend, Rupert Spira, contemporary mystic, who has taken some time out of the retreat that we're on with him this week to talk with us about non-duality, Advaita Vedanta, and we're going to, from A Course in Miracles perspective, just ask him a couple of questions and see how he responds to, at its essence, is always the same thing. Thank you so much for...
Not at all. Pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you for joining with us today. And it is our joy and pleasure to be able, actually to be in this retreat with you this week is just amazing. And we're having real experiences from the practice, the process that you offer in your teaching. And we really want to share this with some of our listeners and some of our audience.
Okay.
Our Course in Miracles audience. And also we have many of the people that follow what we do are Muji. They're friends of ours from Muji, from Portugal, and that's what actually led us to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, so we're aware that you don't know A Course in Miracles.
Yes.
And
yes.
so much the better, because a fresh perspective really helps. I'd like to just read you a brief paragraph and sort of get your take on this. Projection makes perception. The world you see is what you gave it, nothing more than that. But though it is no more than that, it is not less. Therefore, to you, it is important. It is the witness to your state of mind, the outside picture of an inward condition. As a man thinketh, so does he perceive. Therefore, seek not to change the world, but choose to change your mind about the world. Perception is a result and not a cause.
Yes, everything that we know of the world, our entire experience of the world, is known by the mind, through the mind, in the mind. And therefore, the mind's knowledge of the world can only ever be as good as its knowledge of itself. In fact, the way we perceive the world, as William Blake put it in that quote, the way we perceive the world is a direct reflection of the way we understand ourselves. And that is why the highest science, and indeed the ultimate, the highest pursuit that anyone can engage in, is to know the ultimate nature of their own mind. Until the mind recognizes its own essential nature, it cannot expect to know anything that is true about the world. And it is for this reason that, for instance, the Sufi mystic Balayani said, "Whosoever knows their self knows their Lord." In other words, whosoever knows the essential irreducible nature of their own mind knows the absolute reality of the world.
And the Course talks about ego mind and God mind, which is a little different than the way you speak of mind. Could you just clarify a bit about mind?
Yes. The easiest way to look at this is through the analogy of the dream. So imagine that someone falls asleep in their bed and they dream of, let's say, a Caribbean beach. They cannot know that Caribbean beach directly with their own mind, asleep in bed. The dreamer's mind imagines the world, the Caribbean beach in this case, within itself. But in order to know or perceive that world, the Caribbean beach, the dreamer's mind has to enter its own imagination and appear in the dreamed world as a separate subject of experience, from whose point of view the dreamed world, the Caribbean beach, may be known. So from the point of view of the dreamer, asleep in her bed, the entire world, the Caribbean beach, and the separate subject of experience who perceives it, are both made out of her own unlimited and indivisible mind. However, in order to manifest the world, in order to create a world, the dreamer's mind has to fall asleep to itself. It has to overlook the unlimited nature of itself and collapse into or localize itself in the separate subject of experience in the dream, from whose point of view the world may be known. So what you call the ego mind is the mind of the separate subject of experience in the dream, from whose point of view the dreamed world is known. What you call the God mind is the dreamer's mind, which limits itself for the sake of bringing creation forth. So what is very important to understand is that the ego mind is not something separate or distinct from God's mind. In fact, the ego mind has no status of its own. It is not an independently existing mind. It is simply a limitation, a temporary limitation of the only mind there is, God's infinite mind.
That's tremendously helpful. I think Bill has a follow-up question to that.
Well, I do. I really want to I want to stay with this idea of the dreamer and the images that we have made. And there's a workbook lesson, I think it's 15, that I would love for you to read a part of, and then I'll have a question after you do that.
Workbook lesson 15 is, my thoughts are images that I have made. And the first paragraph reads, it is because the thoughts you think appear as images that you do not recognize them as nothing. You think them, and so you think you see them. This is how your quote-unquote seeing was made. This is the function you have given your body's eyes. It is not seeing, it is image-making. It takes the place of seeing, replacing vision with illusions.
Yes. The character in the dream, the dreamed character, the separate subject of experience, from whose point of view the Caribbean beach is perceived, thinks that what she sees, the Caribbean beach or the world out there, is made out of something outside mind. And the name we give to this stuff is matter. So from the point of view of the character in the dream, her experience is divided into two separate realities. Mind on the inside, that is all her own thoughts, images, feelings, and matter on the outside, which is what objects, others, and the world are made out of. So the character in the dream, the separate subject of experience, thinks that she is seeing something out there that has its own separate, independent reality. She doesn't realize that the reality of the world out there and the reality of the self in here are both modulations of the single, infinite, indivisible mind of the dreamer. So from the dreamer's point of view, everything that takes place both inside the character on the beach and everything that takes place outside are all made of her own indivisible mind. In other words, they are one infinite, indivisible whole. And hence the Sufis say, everything is God's face. There is no reality outside consciousness. consciousness, or in religious language, God's infinite being, is the reality of both the so-called outside world and the so-called inside self. And the inside self and the outside world come into apparent existence when the dreamer falls asleep to her own mind. And this falling asleep to her own mind enables the self and the world to come into apparent existence. And this is why it says, for instance, in the Bhagavad Gita, what is sleep for the sage is waking for the ignorant. What is sleep for the ignorant is waking for the sage. When the dreamer falls asleep, the dreamed character wakes up. The one who is ignorant of her true nature wakes up. And the world she sees is a reflection of the limitations of the mind through which she perceives it. But when she falls asleep, the dreamer wakes up.
Good one, good one. I want to just sort of segue into that a little bit, because one of the things that what I loved about Mooji when I met Mooji, in fact, it's funny that you're from London, because that's where I met Mooji, in London. And I started following him about 5 years ago, and then not too long ago, I found you because I was checking out what Mooji was doing, and you were at this conference, same conference he was at. But one of the things that, Mooji points to the self, and of course, and actually A Course in Miracles also points to the self in different kind of language. I am as God created me. I am in condensing that to one word, I am the self. And you, in your term of the thing that you mostly simplify is a word awareness. I absolutely connect with that word. I own it. I know that you own it too, but I own it. And this awareness, this practice, or not the practice, or the noticing of the absolute awareness that we are. You have simplified the understanding of that relationship to a level that's I've never been able to explain it as easily as you can just bring everybody right to awareness in the simplicity of explanation. And one of the things that I've really experienced in a whole new way since coming to this retreat is meditation. I've never experienced meditation like I've experienced it in the last few days. And in the guided meditation, you bring us, in guiding us, you bring us to this state of recognition in awareness. And then you talk about in the guidance, you talk about the images that you bring images into mind in this guided meditation. Can you tell us what's occurring in this guided meditation with the images that we have made in this awakened state where we're bringing forth images?
Can I just clarify what you mean by images? Are you referring to what I call the yoga meditations that we do, the visualizations that we do? That's what you're referring. You're asking about those.
The visualizations
that we did this morning and yesterday morning. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. To explain that, I'm going to have to back up a little bit and put them in the context of the whole teaching and the whole approach to meditation. Most people start with the belief, and more importantly the feeling, that I am this body, and that it is this body that is aware of objects, others, and the world. So the first step this direct path approach takes is to ask the question, what is it that knows or is aware of our experience? It's not the body that is aware of our experience, because the body is experienced. We experience the body as a flow of sensations and perceptions. So the first question we ask is, what is it that is aware of our thoughts, images, feelings, sensations and perceptions? Whatever it is that is aware of our thoughts, sensations and perceptions is obviously not itself a thought, a sensation or a perception. So with this question, the mind is invited to investigate the knowing element of its experience. What is it that knows or is aware of my experience? Whatever it is that knows or is aware of my experience is not itself an experience. It is not a thought, a feeling, a sensation, or a perception. So this question invites the mind in what we could call an objectless direction, away from the objects of experience that we are aware of, thoughts, feelings, sensations, and perceptions, towards that which knows them, the knowing element in all experience. Now, the common name that we give for that which knows or is aware of our experience is I. We say, I know my thoughts. I am aware of my feelings. I perceive the landscape. So I is the common name we give for that element of experience that knows or is aware of all objective experience. So the question, what is it that knows or is aware of my experience, could be reformulated, who or what am I? Now, that question, as you know, is considered the pivotal question in self-inquiry. But in my opinion, although it is a perfectly valid question, a beautiful question, it has been, in our culture, it has been dulled through overuse and misuse. And therefore it has lost some of its potency, some of its power to invite the mind in this objectless direction.
Right.
So I tend not to use it, or if I do use it, I use it in the context that I'm now explaining. I prefer a question such as, what is it that knows or is aware of my experience, or what aspect of experience has remained with me all my life? No thought, feeling, sensation or perception has remained with us all our life. All our thoughts and perceptions are continually appearing and disappearing. So we could reformulate the question, what aspect of my experience never appears or disappears? What aspect of my experience is present now, was present 2 minutes ago, 2 days ago, 2 months ago, 2 years ago, or 20 years ago? What element of my experience was present when I was a 5-year-old girl or boy and still remains present now? All these questions, they are sacred questions. Sacred questions in the sense that they are the only question that invites the mind in an objectless direction. If I were to ask you now, what are you thinking of? You would direct your attention towards your thoughts. If I were to ask you, what time is it? You would direct your attention towards your watch. If I were to ask you now about your family, you would direct your attention towards an image. But this unique question, this sacred question, what is the nature of the knowing with which I know my experience? Or what element of experience can never be separated from me? If we ask this question and then we pause and we see where the mind goes in order to find the answer, it doesn't direct itself towards any kind of objective experience. In fact, without realizing it, the mind is beginning to trace its way back to its essence. And this is the process that is sometimes called self-inquiry. In fact, it is not really a process, it's more of a non-process. It is a relaxing or a sinking backwards or inwards or selfwards of the mind, rather than the directing, the controlling or the focusing of the mind. It is the process that Ramana Maharshi referred to as sinking the mind into the heart of awareness. It's the process that Rumi, the Sufi mystic, described when he said, flow down and down and down in ever-widening rings of being. What he was referring to is as the mind flows downwards or inwards in this objectless direction, he said this beautiful phrase, ever-widening rings of being. The mind is, in most cases gradually, occasionally suddenly, but in most cases gradually, the mind is divested of its limitations. And at some point, the mind reaches that aspect of itself which is irreducible, essential, the essential nature of mind, pure, luminous, empty awareness. And that recognition is what is traditionally called awakening or enlightenment. It is not something extraordinary, although it occasionally has extraordinary effects on the body and the mind, and those effects are colourful and exotic, and we hear about them in the traditional literature. But the actual recognition of the nature of our own being is not itself extraordinary. It's a very simple, intimate, familiar, ordinary experience that everybody has equal access to. The Buddha, Ramana Maharshi, had no more access to it than you or I. So this recognition of our essential nature is the culmination of the first step, what I would call the first step. And it is this recognizing.
The first step of the meditation?
The first step of, let's call it the spiritual approach, this inward-facing path. And we find this inward-facing path in all the traditions. It's the path of discrimination. It's the, in the Vedantic approach, it's the inward-facing path. In the Zen tradition, it's called the Great Death. In the Christian tradition, it's the path of purification. But it's only halfway, and this is something that is not often understood. Many of the traditional Vedantic teachings and the contemporary teachings that come from the Vedantic approach stop there. They focus on the recognition of our true nature. The recognition of our true nature is at most halfway. In fact, I would say it wasn't even halfway, but let's say it's a halfway stage. After the recognition of our true nature, it is necessary for the mind to turn round again and go face again the objects from which it initially turned away in the self-investigation process. Mm-hmm. I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. The mind turns inwards or selfwards in the inward-facing path, the path of self-inquiry. Mm-hmm. But after this recognition, it is necessary to turn back again towards the objects of experience, particularly towards the way we experience the body and the world, and then to collapse the distinction between awareness and its objects. And this is a path that, although implicit in the Vedantic teachings, is not made explicit in them and is often left out. It's left out of some traditional Vedantic teachings and most contemporary teachings that come from Vedanta. This outward-facing path, the path of return, the great rebirth, as they in the Zen tradition, is best elaborated in the Tantric traditions, particularly the Tantric tradition of Kashmir Shaivism, in which we turn towards experience again, and we try to feel the body and perceive the world in a way that is consistent with our new understanding, our new sense of ourself. So these images, so that was the very long background to my
that was beautiful.
Answer. So now to answer your question specifically about these images, or in fact the visualizations that we use in our morning meditations, they're nothing to do with the investigation into our true nature. I'm presuming that you have all recognized your true nature or are on the threshold. Yeah. They are means by which we take our newfound enlightened understanding back out into the way we feel the body and perceive the world, and subsequently the way this new way of feeling and perceiving in turn has an effect on our activities and our relationships in the world. So these visualizations that we do are a way of bringing our enlightened understanding out of the heart, so to speak, back out into our felt and lived experience in the world, the way we feel the body. For instance, it's one thing to recognize, yes, I am this open, empty, colorless, ever-present awareness. But it's quite another thing to feel the body in a way that is consistent with that. Most people feel this body is something solid, dense, limited, and located. If we may understand the body is an appearance in awareness, known by awareness, but to feel that the body is not only an appearance in awareness, but made of awareness. In other words, that consciousness is the stuff out of which the body and the world are made. That is quite a different matter. And these yoga meditations that we do, these visualizations we do in the morning, are attempts to realign the way we feel the body and perceive the world with this new enlightened understanding.
And this process or this practice, is it dissolving those false the dreamer's dream? Is it beginning to dissolve or diminish the dreamer's dream from occurring? Is it like going reverse?
It doesn't stop the dream occurring. In other words, both the inward-facing path, the self-inquiry meditation, and this outward-facing path, they don't stop the world appearing to us. The world continues to appear. It's not Maya or illusion that disappears. It's ignorance that disappears.
Yeah.
The appearance of the world continues, but the ignorance of its reality disappears.
So it's dissolving our perception of the way we see the world.
Well, actually, it's dissolving our belief, and more importantly, our feeling that the world is something other than ourself.
Right.
It's not dissolving anything that is really there, because from the beginning there was never anything there other than consciousness or God's infinite being. But the reality of the world, consciousness or God's infinite being, was overlaid with beliefs and feelings. And those beliefs and feelings made it seem that the world was made out of something other than infinite consciousness or God's infinite being, namely matter, and that it was known by a separate individual located in here.
Yes.
So this belief, this duality between the self and the world, never really comes into existence. Remember, the dreamed character and the dreamed world, they never really come into existence in their own right. They are always just a coloring of the dreamer's mind.
Right.
So the inside self and the outside world, they are the agencies of manifestation, but they never actually come into existence with their own separate, independent reality. So it is not the appearance of the world that disappears, it is the beliefs and feelings that the mind superimposes onto that world. What is really there, its reality, it has always been the same, the only reality there is. This is why Huang Po said, people ignore the reality of the illusory world. The world as a multiplicity and diversity of objects made out of matter is an illusion. But all illusions have a reality to them. And the reality of this world is infinite consciousness, or God's infinite being.
Right.
So Rupert, I'd love to ask, do we have a few more minutes?
Yeah.
Something I'm sure Course in Miracles people are wondering, because I'm often asked this, I'm sure Bill is too. The Course puts it this way, that into the mind of God crept a tiny mad idea that we could separate from God. And the Course says to us, you are the dreamer of the dream. So many people say, why? Why would we do this?
Well, into the mind of God crept a tiny mad idea. Where did that tiny mad idea come from? Did it come from outside God's mind? No. Is there anything outside God's mind? And how could something that appears in God's mind be a tiny mad idea? Are we saying that God is mad? Are we saying that God is capable of ignorance? No, we are not. This tiny mad idea, the idea of separation, didn't creep into God's mind by mistake from the outside. God freely of herself assumed the separation in order to bring forth creation. Remember that the dreamer asleep in her bed cannot directly know the Caribbean beach. She has to fall asleep to her own mind. She has to enter her own imagination as a separate subject of experience. It's only from the point of view of that separate subject of experience that the dreamer's mind can know itself as the world. In other words, our separate, limited minds are not the entities, but are the agencies through which God's infinite being knows itself as the world. In other words, God's infinite mind freely assumes the form of the finite mind in order to bring manifestation out of itself, out of its own being, into existence. So the separate self is not a mistake. It's not a problem. It's only a problem if the separate self believes itself to be a separate entity. So as an entity, the separate self is a problem. But as an agency or an activity, it is God's accomplice. God's accomplice. God's accomplice. Yes, it's.
The Course says you are at home, dreaming that you are in exile.
Yes,
and
beautiful.
you speak
beautiful.
of experiencing. Experiencing has a reality to it, but not as an entity. It's not an actual.
Yes, the dreamer is lying peacefully asleep in her own bed, at ease in her own bed, dreaming that she's having a terrible time on the other side of the world. She feels, from the point of view of the dreamed character, in the dream, yes, she is in exile. She doesn't realize that she is a localization of the dreamer's mind, who is always at rest in herself.
Well, I think the last comment would be, you used in the meditation today, I can't say enough times, the meditations that you lead are just mind-blowing, literally mind-blowing.
Do you know what the word nirvana means? It means blown out.
Blown out.
Blown out.
Oh, nice.
That's what it is. It's the nirvana. It's not some extraordinary exotic state. It means the blowing out of the finiteness of the mind.
That's totally appropriate.
Yes. So when you say these meditations, they're mind blowing. Yes, they blow out that aspect of the mind that feels separate and limited. They are revelations of the essential nature of the mind.
Nice.
Yes.
Nice. The Course sums up the general theme of itself with 3 sentences. And you used it from another author, I think it was today. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. And herein lies the peace of God.
Beautiful. That's same recognition as it says in the Bhagavad Gita, that which is never ceases to be, that which is not never comes into existence.
Yeah. And
ask yourself now, do you ever know or come in contact with anything other than the knowing of experience?
No.
Whether you're deeply depressed, ecstatically happy, or just having breakfast, is there anything to your experience other than the knowing of it?
No.
No. Nobody has ever experienced anything other than knowing. And I don't mean to imply that people experience knowing. It is knowing or consciousness that knows only itself, manifesting itself in and as all of experience. So we could say that all experience, or the finite mind, is the activity of consciousness. all there is consciousness and its own activity. So just as a movie could be said to be the activity of the screen. But in a movie, the landscape, the people, the objects, the houses never actually come into existence. They never stand out from the screen. All there is the screen and its own activity. Therefore, nothing that takes place in the movie can damage the screen. Nothing that takes place in consciousness can damage consciousness, because all that's in consciousness is consciousness.
Oh.
And
It cannot harm itself. Therefore, this that we essentially are, this open, empty presence of awareness, is never harmed by experience. It is never stained. It is never hurt. It is never aged. It is always in the same pristine, luminous, ageless, birthless condition.
The unborn.
The unborn mind, yes.
I'd just like to clarify for Course students that the Course says God is knowledge. And this knowing that you're speaking
God
of. God is knowledge.
Is pure knowing, yes.
Yes, and whereas the ego has lots of information or intellectuality, but that is not this
But
pure knowing.
even all the ego's knowledge and information, all there is to it is knowing.
The essence of it.
Not just the essence of it, the totality of it. Think of anything you know now. Is there anything to that knowledge other than knowing? Knowing is the totality. It's the essence, the substance, the reality, the totality. It is all there is. And because there is nothing in itself other than itself, there are no limits. It is infinite. So everything, all seeming things, experience is always one intimate, infinite, perfect, indivisible whole. No experience ever adds anything to it. No experience ever removes anything from it. And that discovery, this beautiful last line that you quoted from the Course, that discovery is peace. Yeah. Not a fragile peace that we discover in the background of experience, that has to remove itself from experience, but the peace that is both in the background of experience, but is also in the midst of experience. Yeah. And then it is no longer necessary to withdraw from experience into the witnessing presence of awareness. We can go back out into life, into activities, into relationships, because we are safe everywhere.
Would it be correct to say that knowledge or knowing is the container for all information?
Well, you see, when you say it's the container for all information, it's like saying that knowing is the container and knowledge or information is something that appears in that.
I meant to say the borderless container.
Well, as a concession to separate objects of knowledge, we could say that consciousness is the container, in the same way that we could say the screen is the container of the movie. That's a good halfway understanding. But the screen is not the container of the movie, because there's no such thing called a movie. A movie is just the coloring of the screen. So there is no such thing called knowledge or experience. There is just pure knowing, pure consciousness, modulating itself in all forms of experience. But it is not the container of anything, because there is nothing other than itself to be contained.
Thank you. That is so helpful.
You make you complicated information sound very simple. Thank you for joining with us today.
Pleasure.
It's been our joy and pleasure to have you on the show.
Means so much.
Thank you both very much. Thank you.
Bless you.